You know, hunters, size doesn't mean everything in Monster Hunter. If you're a little bit smaller than other monsters, that doesn't necessarily mean you're weak. Take Odogaron, Rajang, Atalkal. So size doesn't mean everything.
Are you sure?
Until you get to a certain point. Because if you're so big that something like a Zenogre seems small compared to you,
wow, big lady.
then at that point, yeah, size does matter. But monsters at that size usually just depend on the fact that they are so big that other monsters just can't hang with them. However, it's a different story when someone just as big as you wants to run the ones.
Good day for a swell battle.
And that is what this video is all about. Who would win? Jin Dahaad versus Gammoth. However, I gotta put out some disclaimers here. The first and probably the biggest one being that I'm working with very limited information here. We honestly don't know that much about either of these monsters. And honestly, a lot of it is just pure speculation. So in this video, I'm only going to be talking about things we know for sure, or some things that just make sense. You know, there's some evidence to support that, hey, this could probably happen, but maybe we just haven't seen it yet, you know? My second disclaimer is that I'm going to be fair with both of these monsters. You're probably asking, Spottable, why is that a disclaimer? Well, I gotta say it because a lot of people probably will think, hey, you're downplaying this monster, you're highballing this monster, yada, yada, yada. They're like, no, not at all. I love both of these monsters, but I don't have an agenda here. I'm gonna talk about good things, I'm gonna talk about bad things with both of these monsters. And that's going to be all of the disclaimers. I know I didn't have to say them, but I'd rather have it in the beginning of the video than people just assuming things. Shit, I'm not gonna lie, it's probably not gonna really stop anyone from assuming things, but for my peace of mind, I had to say it. But now let's actually get into Jin Dahaad and Gammoth. I'm gonna go over both of them, and let's start with Gammoth. I know I just said let's start with Gammoth, but if you guys don't know really that much about Gammoth, you haven't found her, you maybe just know about her just because you've seen her somewhere, you hunters need to start by looking at my How Powerful is Gammoth video. I made that video solely for this video right here. So I'm only going to be talking about some main important things with Gammoth, and Gammoth's section is definitely going to be shorter than Jin Dahaad's because I made a dedicated video for Gammoth. So Gammoth, the queen of the tundra, the biggest fanged beast in the series. And you might be asking, Spottable, why are you calling her she? And that's because every single Gammoth you fight in-game is canonically always female. Well, where's all the male Gammoths? Why can't we hunt any male Gammoths? And that's because the Hunters Guild has deemed all male Gammoths too dangerous to hunt. That's insane. But since we don't know that much about them, I'm only going to be talking about the female Gammoth. But I always have to say it because it's so cool to mention that there's a monster so dangerous, you're not allowed to hunt it. So how strong is the Gammoth that we actually fight in game? Like I said in the beginning of the video, we don't have that much information on Jin Dahaad and Gammoth, but for Gammoth, there is one cutscene. So we're pretty much just going to be talking about that. So how does this cutscene play out? Tigrex wakes up, Gammoth instantly feels a disturbance in the force, gets her face jumped on by Tigrex. Tigrex starts gnawing, clawing, doing the most. Gammoth grabs Tigrex, says, hey, get the fuck off me, and then throws Tigrex like a dirty towel. And that's pretty much it. First things first, let's talk about the giant blue mammoth in the room. That being how easily Gammoth was able to grab Tigrex and chuck that bitch. No effort, no sweat.
Light work, no reaction.
And this isn't a one-time thing of Gammoth showing off how strong she is, because in-game, almost every single physical hit that she does destroys the ground underneath her. So when we see Gammoth grab Tigrex and throw him like a toy, that's just her normal strength. But it's not all about attack. She got some elite defense. What's her defense? Large scales, rock hard body? Nope. She got a lot of muscle. And we can see that when Tigrex tries to bite on her face and nothing happens. Not a single scratch. It is hard to significantly damage a Gammoth. Because let's say you were even able to puncture Gammoth, because she's so thick, her actual organs and all of that will be completely safe.
This shit ain't nothing to me, man.
Will it hurt? Yeah. But she'll be fine. And I gotta emphasize how impressive this is because it's Tigrex that's trying to bite down on Gammoth. Tigrex is physically actually stronger than your standard wyvern. I mean, just look at what he did to Radobot. This is crazy. Tigrex's mouth is made to crunch and break bone, but that shit means nothing to Gammoth. Again, not a single mark left on Gammoth. Also, I'd like to mention, in case it wasn't evident by watching this cutscene, a Tigrex, a very strong wyvern, cannot do anything to Gammoth. When a Gammoth reaches maturity, they cannot be predated at all. And that pretty much wraps up with like how strong is Gammoth. Now, I do have to mention some bad things. The first downside to Gammoth has got to be like the fact that she's so big means that she's pretty slow. But that's why she has such a high defense, because if something like Odogaron was like attacking her, she would not be able to catch that motherfucker for some time. Another thing that's a big issue is that her back legs are pretty much defenseless. They are strong. I mean, she's able to support her weight by standing on her two back legs. But if someone were to attack her from like the back side, she doesn't really have a good way of like deterring people from doing that. That's why in game, the best way to take her down is to just keep on being behind her and attacking her back legs. And that kind of goes hand in hand with another problem. She doesn't really have a way to like get someone off her back if they were to attack her back.
Get this shit off me! Ah!
Now keep in mind, the upper part of her back, like up here, yeah, no, I think her trunk is long enough that I think she can grab like a monster. But when it comes to like her lower back, no, she's pretty much defenseless. And that's all of Gammoth's big weaknesses. There might be some smaller ones here and there, but for actual meaningful weaknesses, yeah, I feel like that's all. Now I will say that this is all assuming that Gammoth is alone when fighting Jin Dahaad. I'm not talking about another fully grown Gammoth. I'm talking about, imagine there's a baby Gammoth nearby and the one that's fighting Jin Dahaad is the mother. Holy shit, that mother Gammoth might go feral on Jin Dahaad. And it would honestly probably like change how this fight would go, but no kids are going to be involved, so Jin Dahaad is lucky here. But that's going to have to do it for Gammoth. Now onto the Leviathan that is unmatched, Jin Dahaad. Like Gammoth, Jin Dahaad is the biggest of its monster class. He is now officially the largest Leviathan in the series. Even bigger than Abyssal Lagiacrus, who I believe was the biggest Leviathan before Wilds came out, because move out of the way, Lagiacrus, there's a new big dog in town. But it's not just his size that's intimidating, because one of the first things that you see when you actually look at Jin Dahaad is like, yo, what's up with all these like plates around his body? They look kind of weird. It almost looks like metal. And other than looking cool as fuck and providing some pretty good defense, some of these ridges actually have a purpose. They allow Jin Dahaad to pretty much do all the ice shenanigans that he can do. How this works is that Jin Dahaad pushes all the heat inside his body and even a little bit outside his body towards the tips of these very specific metallic plates, resulting in his body temperature drastically lowering to the point that he can actually perform these ice attacks. Which I kind of want to make a small side tangent here, because oh my god, that is such a cool way to make a monster have the ice element. The actual process that Jin Dahaad is using to make his ice is something that we in the real world use. We use the process of pushing heat somewhere else so that it could cool something off, usually in our electronic devices. You actually might be looking at this process right now. If you have a PC right next to you, there's a good chance that there's a heat sink in that PC. So congratulations, you have a little Jin Dahaad in your PC. Yippee! Dang, now thinking about it, a gaming PC centered around the theme of Jin Dahaad would go crazy. Alright, side tangent over, because we gotta talk about the actual ice moves that Jin Dahaad does, because some of this stuff is pretty crazy. A lot of the ice attacks he does are just like infused melee attacks that have like a major AoE effect. Whether he's kind of like rearing up and then slamming his body down, he picks up one claw, slams it down, then there's a bunch of ice frost across the battlefield. He can even infuse his tail with the ice element, so when he hits something, it does even more damage. But I'd be here all day if I talked about every single move Jin Dahaad can do. Just know that with almost every single melee attack he does, he can infuse his hits with the ice element and make them even stronger. But he does have some moves that he doesn't even need to physically touch you to hurt you. He has a move where he stands still and then covers the entire area around him in Frosty Mist. This move doesn't do a lot of damage, it's more to restrict a lot of people from moving by covering them in ice. He has another move that's very similar to the last one, where he stands completely still and creates like a mini blizzard around him. This move is a lot stronger than the last one because it doesn't just kind of create like a little bit of mist. Instead, everything around him is being frozen. Large ice spikes start forming around him, and even the hunter starts to get encased in ice. And if you can't get out of the ice prison he got you in, he'll follow it up with a strong attack.
Better scramble like an egg before you get folded like an omelet, nigga.
Jin Dahaad does not need to be small and fast to combo you into oblivion. And then of course we have Jin Dahaad's breath attack, which is actually different than most ice monsters' breath attacks. Instead of it being like a beam attack like Gossarag, Velkhana, and Glacial Agnactor, Jin Dahaad's breath attack looks way more like Kolv Taroth's breath attack, where it doesn't look like a physical beam of elemental energy, but instead is like superheated air. And I guess with Jin Dahaad, it's more like super freezing air. It's a little hard to explain, but you know what I mean. It's definitely different. But there's one more thing in common with Jin Dahaad and Kolv Taroth's breath attack. Whenever Kolv Taroth's breath attack hits anything, it seems to almost instantly melt whatever it touches. And with Jin Dahaad's breath attack, if it hits anything, even for a second, it will start to freeze. And we can see that right here where Jin Dahaad's breath attack hit the ground, there are now ice spikes, which is honestly ridiculous. I mean, just being able to compare Jin Dahaad's breath attack to a very strong Elder Dragon's breath attack like Kolv Taroth's is very impressive. Now, I will say that I don't think Jin Dahaad's breath attack is as potent as Kolv Taroth's, but again, it's still pretty impressive to make even a comparison between the two. Now, before I talk about the move that I'm sure a lot of you want me to talk about, I want to talk about some other stuff first. Like, what are some feats that Jin Dahaad has? And honestly, Jin Dahaad has like barely any feats, which is surprising because you would think that Capcom would want to show off how awesome this new Leviathan is. And this is what I'm talking about when I was saying that I'm working with very limited information here, because Jin Dahaad has no turf wars, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have any feats. He has a few that I want to talk about, and yes, they're not going to be very flashy, but I feel like I would be doing Jin Dahaad a disservice by not even mentioning them. So we got a strength, a durability, and a speed feat to talk about. Starting with a strength feat, it's like the first thing we see Jin Dahaad do. That being, of course, when Jin Dahaad is climbing on walls. Now, a lot of you might not think that this is a strength feat, but I would beg to differ. And let me explain why. Jin Dahaad being able to carry and support his weight when he's climbing on walls would mean that his legs are very strong. If I had to give a real world example of what this is like, it's like how silverback gorillas can climb trees despite their weight and not being an arboreal animal just because they are that strong. It's the same thing that's happening here with Jin Dahaad. Now, I can hear you saying, oh, but Spottable, doesn't Jin Dahaad use ice to help him scale walls? And yes, the ice on his feet do help him actually stay on the walls, but he still needs to be strong enough to support his entire weight. And Jin Dahaad climbs walls like it's nothing, despite looking like he's not really adapted to do that. Some of you might not think it's impressive, but I do, because not just any monster can do that. Now, for the durability feat, we can see in the cutscene after you beat Jin Dahaad that the hunters makes this huge chunk of this structure fall on him. Now, what makes this impressive is when you realize that Jin Dahaad is on like low HP here. Almost all of his metal plates are broken and he's on death's door. Something made out of ice, metal, and rock, half the size of him at least, fell on him and he lived, while being like half dead. Now, some of you might be saying, oh, but Spottable, don't we have like a bunch of big stuff fall on Jin Dahaad while we're fighting him? And yeah, that's true. That's one of the best ways to damage him while you're fighting him. But I've always not been a big fan of like saying, oh, this monster can survive this because in game we have this thing fall on them. I mean, we can have this big ass crystal pillar fall on Dodo Gamma and all it does is just kind of topple him. But if you drop the same crystal pillar on someone like Kushala, the same thing happens, which to tell you that it's just a game mechanic and you shouldn't really take it literal. But with Jin Dahaad, we actually see a cutscene of this happening, which actually proves that the things in game that we drop on him, he should be able to tank. Funny enough, right after this happens is the speed feat I want to talk about. As Jin Dahaad is being crushed by all these boulders, he also falls down like underneath the ground. We don't know how deep it is. All we know is that he fell beneath the ground. But even with that happening and the fact that the hunters got a head start on Jin Dahaad and being almost dead, he still catches up to the hunters.
Look at this dude. Wait till you see the...
Alright, by some miracle.
Huh?
What's good, Nyaka?
I
want that booty, Tom.
You can't have my booty!
Oh, yeah, I can.
The booty is mine. It belongs to me. You cannot take my booty!
Which shows that if Jin Dahaad really wants to, in short bursts, he can go incredibly fast. At least incredibly fast for a monster so big. And honestly, potentially even faster than what we see here in the cutscene, because again, he's almost dead, and since he fell down into the ground, he most likely had to either dig or push away a bunch of rocks to get to the hunters. Because we actually see that he breaches out of the ground, which means he had something in front of him. If Jin Dahaad was at full HP and didn't have anything obstructing his path, I think he would have been able to catch the hunters easily. Now that I'm done talking about Jin Dahaad's feats, it's finally time to talk about his ultimate move.
That's what we've been waiting for! It's what we wanted all along!
When something is giving Jin Dahaad too much trouble, he decides to take the American route and absolutely nuke whatever the fuck is annoying him. He'll first stand still and immediately start to suck up all the cold air around him. A bunch of stuff is happening while this is going on. The hunters start getting sucked up towards Jin Dahaad, an ice wall is forming around him, and his plates on his body are going into absolute overdrive. And in the middle of all of this, a giant leviathan is about to nuke you, so a lot of shit is happening here. But then, after waiting a while, he releases an ice blast so large it'd make Velkhana blush.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
The fact that they made Jin Dahaad's ultimate move use the same mechanics like Behemoth and Safi'jiiva shows you how powerful this move is. It's up there as one of the most powerful explosion attacks that a monster has ever done, excluding Frontier and Explore. Like Teostro's ultimate explosion move, and a Savage Devil Joe when he puts down a bunch of unstable dragon energy and then explodes it. Dude, Jin Dahaad's ultimate move blows both of those monsters' attacks out of the water. I think Jin Dahaad's Ice Nuke can only really be compared to like some of the strongest ultimate moves from top tier Elder Dragons, like Geismagorm's ultimate Curio Blast and Shara Ishvalda's Sound Spirit Bomb. Even with that being said, I think the actual radius of Jin Dahaad's ultimate move is even bigger than the ultimate moves from Geismagorm and Shara Ishvalda. Of course, I'm only talking about the radius of the attack and not the actual attack potency, because I think the actual attack potency of Jin Dahaad's ultimate move is the same as Geismagorm's and Shara Ishvalda's. But even then, that is a ludicrous amount of power from a monster that isn't even an Elder Dragon. I know for a fact that Jin Dahaad fans are loving that I'm glazing Jin Dahaad so much here. But I'm sorry to say that there's going to be no more glaze, because we gotta talk about Jin Dahaad's weaknesses. Jin Dahaad doesn't have that many weaknesses, but there are two big weaknesses that I can think of right off the bat. The first one having to do with Jin Dahaad's heat sink process that he uses to actually create his ice moves. Now, don't get me wrong, it does obviously benefit him. I mean, because of that heatsink process and his metal plates, he has some of the strongest ice attacks in the series. Clarification here, I'm talking about the mainline series, but that process is also a double-edged sword, because it's real nice to have all that powerful ice element until your plates start getting broken off, and now you can't use the ice element that much. Now, I'm not saying that if Jin Dahaad's plates get broken that he can't use any of his ice attacks, it's just that he can't use certain moves and his output overall would be lowered. Now, I can hear you all saying, but Spotable, when I fight Jin Dahaad towards the end and I have all of his plates broken off, he can still do a lot of his ice attacks. So shouldn't that mean that Jin Dahaad can use all of his ice attacks? It's just that they don't hit as hard? Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, but I'm just gonna have to disagree. Things that I think Jin Dahaad can do, even if all of his plates were broken off, are moves like putting ice on his claws, his regular ice breath attack, that one move where he stands still and creates like a icy mist attack around him when he rears himself up and then slams his body down. And yes, even his ultimate attack where he creates an ice nova, I think he could do, even if all of his plates were broken off. Spottable, isn't that like all of his moves? And yeah, that's almost all of his moves, but there are two very strong moves that he has that I don't think he could do if all of his plates were broken. That being the one where he stands still and creates a blizzard around him. You know, the one where he likes to attack you immediately right after. And then this one move that I actually forgot to mention, where he kind of like charges up and shoots a single ice blast attack. These two moves are stronger attack variants than his normal attacks, so I don't think he'd be able to do those two if all of his plates were broken. Here, I kind of want to give you guys a visual representation of how I see Jin Dahaad's power output compared to how many plates he has. But before I show you this, please keep in mind that this is a very, very rough estimate of how I perceive Jin Dahaad's power, because in reality, no one knows how much Jin Dahaad is affected when each of his plates get broken off. Since Jin Dahaad has 4 main ridges that he pushes heat to, these are the 4 that I'm going to be talking about. I know he has more, but these are the 4 main ones. The ridges on on his tail, lower back, and head are worth about 15% of his max output. But since the ridge on his upper back is by far the largest ridge on his body, and the most durable since you have to break other ridges to even have a chance to break it, it should have more power output compared to the rest of the ridges. So I'm thinking 35%. Now with all that being said, if Jin Dahaad loses all of his 4 main ridges, he would still have about 20% output, which would make sense because if it was 0, that would mean that he couldn't use any ice attacks, which like I said, I don't think that's the case. But even if he doesn't lose the ability to use the ice element, he's still missing about 80% of his power output, which severely nerfs his ice attacks, even the ice nuke that I did say that he can do. And once he's at that 20% point, realistically, he wouldn't be able to do a lot of the stronger attacks that he can do. Well, I say a lot, it's only the 2 that I mentioned before, right? Which again, makes sense because if he pushes heat to the ridges so that he can lower his body temperature so that he can actually perform the ice attacks, if the ridges are broken, he can't do the stronger attacks because he'd end up hurting himself. Oh god, I yapped way longer than I thought I was going to for this point. And luckily, the next weakness that Jin Dahaad has, I will not talk about as much because it's very straightforward. And it has to do with Jin Dahaad's ultimate move. But wait a minute, Spottable, weren't you glazing this move? Yeah, I was, because it is a strong move. The downside to it is that it takes forever to pull off. Do you know how long it takes Jin Dahaad to actually pull off his ultimate move? It takes 15 seconds. If I want to be generous, 14 seconds. Because at the 14-second mark, he actually stops sucking in heat. And I don't want to hear people saying, oh, but its upside is so much better than its downside. It shouldn't really be considered a weakness. The reason why I don't want to hear people saying this is because when I was doing my research for my Raid Out versus Astalos video, I saw people genuinely thinking that Raid Out's railgun attack didn't mean anything to Astalos because Raid Out's railgun attack took too long to charge, which is stupid because in my video I showed that it took 3 seconds for Raid Out to pull off his railgun attack. Jin Dahaad's ultimate move takes 5 times as long to pull off. 15 seconds is a lot of time for anything to get out of the blast radius. Now thinking about it, that actually might explain why Jin Dahaad goes to areas that have like walls around him so that the hunters can't escape from the blast. But that's all for the actual genuine weaknesses that I think Jin Dahaad has. The next 2 things that I'm going to be talking about aren't weaknesses, but they are things that I have to make some clarification on because if I don't, then I'm going to see so many people mentioning it in the comments, and honestly, I just don't want that to happen. So let's just get this stuff out of the way. The first one is pretty easy. Jin Dahaad does not have a mouth for biting down and crunching on things. Now, I wouldn't assume that he has a weak bite force, but compared to monsters like Tigrex and Anjanath, he doesn't really have a similar mouth or jaw structure like those guys do. Jin Dahaad has a very specialized mouth. It's not really made for crunching on bone and ripping off limbs. When he opens up his mouth, it really reminds me of Ibushi and Narwa. Again, this isn't a weakness, I just thought I should bring it up. Something else that I gotta bring up is the weird interaction between Arkveld and Jin Dahaad. Oh, hunters, I bet you thought I forgot. Now, you might be asking, well, why didn't you show that Jin Dahaad is stronger than Arkveld in the good part where you were glazing Jin Dahaad? And it's because, unlike someone like Raid Out, who actually had like a decent fight with him, and a turf war, Jin Dahaad has no interactions with Arkveld, except for one rare exception where they kind of meet and they have a small scuffle, if you can even call it that. It's definitely not a turf war. But this is why I have Arkveld in this part of the video, because while yes, again, I do think Jin Dahaad is stronger than Arkveld, but on the internet, I've seen people wank Jin Dahaad's power to the max, all because Jin Dahaad is the one apex that Arkveld does not go after. Jin Dahaad gets so much glaze from this, you'd think he'd be able to beat Amatsu. I mean, there are people who say that Arkveld cannot take down Jin Dahaad at all. There's not even a possibility, which I don't think that's the case at all. Let me explain. When Arkveld went after Raid Out was the strongest he possibly could have been. He was in his own lair while a storm was happening, and he had Fulgurite on his body. My boy was powered up. Yet despite Raid Out being a very strong wyvern and having everything in his favor, all it took was one wing whip from Arkveld to bring him down. Raid Out having his elemental energy stolen just immediately immobilized him. And again, Arkveld only used one wing whip. So you're telling me that just because Jin Dahaad is a bigger monster, that he wouldn't be paralyzed when Arkveld would be taking his elemental energy? I just don't buy that. Now, is it possible that maybe Jin Dahaad has so much ice element that Jin Dahaad actually wouldn't be able to absorb all of it? That's a possibility. Or maybe that Jin Dahaad being so big, he might actually be able to move a little bit while he's getting his elemental energy stolen.
That makes sense to me.
But to to think that Arkveld can't do what he did to RAHHHHH and just do it to Jin Dahaad is a bit silly. Would it be more challenging for Arkveld? Yes. But do I think he could do it? Also yes. Okay, Spottable, well if it's so easy for Arkveld to do that to Jin Dahaad, why didn't he do it? While my reason might not be canon, at least I don't think it is, it makes so much sense. Tell me, hunters, what is Arkveld? That's right, an extinct species. Why on earth would you fight the biggest Leviathan in the series when there's a perfectly good half-dead fish over here? Arkveld is one of the last of its kind. Why would he risk his life going after such a dangerous monster? It just doesn't make sense. Now, if things were normal for Arkveld, meaning that the Arkveld species wasn't extinct, now there's Arkvelds flying around here and there, I guarantee some of those Arkvelds would go after Jin Dahaad. Most of them would be failed attempts, but there would be those few that would actually be able to succeed in going after a Jin Dahaad. Again, I think that Jin Dahaad is stronger than Arkveld. I'm not trying to downplay him or say that he's not. I'm just trying to tell you, hunters, that Jin Dahaad is not this untouchable god like some of you think he is. Okay, hunters, we are 25 minutes into this video, and finally we are going to be talking about the fight between Jin Dahaad and Gammoth. However, unlike my RAHHHHH versus Astalos video, where I was pretty confident in one guy winning, so I just said this guy won and then gave a few reasons, this fight is so extremely close that I feel like doing it like how I did my last versus video would be a disservice to Jin Dahaad and Gammoth. So instead, I'm going to talk about how I think this fight is going to go down. I'm going to break down this fight into 3 phases. The first phase being the initial encounter, the second phase being that either Jin Dahaad or Gammoth are going to try to change their tactics when it comes to the fight. At the very least, we know that Jin Dahaad does this at some point because when he fights the hunters, he changes how he fights the hunters by climbing on walls and stuff. And then with the third phase being the finale and conclusion of the fight. Now, before I go on and talk about the actual fight, I need to mention some things like location of the fight and things that both monsters have but aren't important to the actual battle. Like the little bit of snow that Gammoth covers herself in and the little bit of ice that Jin Dahaad covers himself in are not going to be useful in this fight at all. Because of how strong both Jin Dahaad and Gammoth are, the snow and ice are going to be irrelevant for both monsters. You know what else is going to be irrelevant? That little sucking vortex move that Gammoth can do. Jin Dahaad is way too big for that move to work on him, so it's pretty much useless. I say pretty much, it is useless. Now, something that isn't useless but extremely circumstantial is when Gammoth shoots out these giant snowballs. Now, you're probably asking the screen, but Spottable, Jin Dahaad is way too big to be hurt by those snowballs. And I would agree that they wouldn't significantly hurt him, but have any of you ever been hit by a snowball the size of your head? That shit definitely dazes you for a second. Same thing applies here. With how fast Gammoth throws these snowballs, if she actually hits Jin Dahaad on the head, it might daze him a little bit. But realistically, this move is only useful in a very hyper-specific scenario, which funny enough, we will be talking about later. That's why I'm mentioning it now. Now, something I gotta say that you guys aren't gonna like me saying, that being Jin Dahaad's Ice Breath attack doesn't really do much to Gammoth. Hold on, let me explain. Don't get me wrong, Jin Dahaad's Ice Breath attack is strong, but against someone like Gammoth, who just sit in blizzards like they're nothing, I just can't really see Jin Dahaad's breath attack doing that much to Gammoth. Now, I'm only talking about Jin Dahaad's normal Ice Breath attack. This other one where he charges his breath attack, yeah, I think if that one actually hits Gammoth, it would do damage to her. And to be clear, I'm only talking about if the attack hits her once. If Jin Dahaad's normal Ice Breath attack keeps on hitting Gammoth in one area multiple times, I actually think it would create a weak spot on Gammoth, kind of like how we the hunters do in Wilds. So yeah, unless Jin Dahaad's normal Ice Breath attack is hitting Gammoth in the same spot multiple times, his Ice Breath attack isn't going to do much to Gammoth. Alright, time to talk about location of the fight, because it is actually kinda important. Now, you don't have to take this literal, but just to give you a visual representation of what I think the area should look like, imagine the area you fight Ukanlos in. A very large, flat surface area, but if you go a little bit further onto the edge, there would be walls. And I feel like I don't have to say this, but I'm gonna say it anyways. These monsters are fighting to the death. Now, with all that out of the way, let's actually get into the first phase of the fight. I know, fucking finally, right? Now, the first thing that's gonna happen when Jin Dahaad and Gammoth actually meet is going to be Jin Dahaad shooting Gammoth with his Ice Breath attack, because it seems that Jin Dahaad uses his ice attacks for the start of most fights. Now, Gammoth is going to eat that attack like breakfast, straight up delicious. Gammoth will then close the distance between her and Jin Dahaad, and then they're both just going to go band for strength.
World star! Yeah!
and they're going to keep on doing that until phase 2 happens. Now, before I actually talk about phase 2, there was something that I thought of that was pretty interesting considering what Jin Dahaad is, that being a Leviathan. Since Jin Dahaad is such a big monster and with his serpent-like body, can't Jin Dahaad just wrap around Gammoth and she can't do anything about it? And I think no, Gammoth wouldn't be defenseless if Jin Dahaad did that. And that's if Jin Dahaad would even do that. Because yes, despite the fact that he can climb on giant structures and other Leviathans like Misune and Agnaktor do it to other monsters, when they're fighting them, Jin Dahaad would have no experience doing this to other monsters because there are no other monsters as big as him to do this to. But even if Jin Dahaad did do this to Gammoth, he would take damage from trying to wrap around Gammoth. Because Jin Dahaad is so large, there will be one part of him, depending on where he attacks or where his head is, that Gammoth will be able to grab and do damage to. For example, let's say that Jin Dahaad is wrapping around Gammoth and he's attacking Gammoth's lower body with his upper body. So he's clawing at her, he's trying to bite her, shooting out breath attacks on her lower back. Gammoth would be able to grab Jin Dahaad's lower body and tail. And considering that Gammoth's trunk is so powerful that it can grab and toss a Tigrex and shatter the ground, it would be strong enough to break some of the plates on Jin Dahaad's body, which I would expect not to feel good. Then again, this isn't just a free lick for Gammoth either, because Jin Dahaad is still clawing at her and doing damage. So all in all, it would be like an even exchange in terms of damage. But since I already said that I don't even think Jin Dahaad would do this in the first place, I'm not going to say that this happened in the hypothetical fight that we're doing with Jin Dahaad and Gammoth. But I just thought it would be something interesting to talk about for a second and give my 2 cents on how it would go down. So now on to the second phase of the fight. At this point, both monsters have taken some damage. Gammoth has cuts all over her body and even has some damage on her head crest. But other than that, she's all good. Now, how is Jin Dahaad looking? Most likely having some bruising on multiple parts of his body and even having one of his 4 main ridges broken. Most likely either being his lower back or tail ridge. For this video, I'm just going to say that his lower back ridge is broken. But other than that, like Gammoth, he's all good. At this point of the fight, Jin Dahaad will probably realize that he can't just use his size to win like how he does with other monsters. So he decides to change up his game plan here. Turning around, he decides to go to the walls on the outskirts of the area they're fighting in. And then obviously, Gammoth starts to chase after Jin Dahaad. Not being too concerned with catching up to him considering he's running right into a wall. He's literally cornered himself. At least that's what she thinks until this Carnival Cruise Line ship with legs starts climbing up the wall like what the fuck? With Jin Dahaad now on the wall and out of the reach of Gammoth, he starts to shoot his breath attack at Gammoth, just getting some free shots off on her. But Gammoth isn't just going to stand there and take it. Being the smart cookie that she is, she grabs some snow and ice from the ground and starts throwing it at Jin Dahaad. Now, Jin Dahaad was actually staying in one place because he didn't think there was a way for Gammoth to reach him. That wasn't until a giant snowball hit him in the face.
Try me, bitch.
That almost made him lose concentration and fall to the ground, but he didn't. Now seeing that Gammoth can actually reach Jin Dahaad from where she is, he'll start to continuously move back and forth while hitting her with his breath attack. Now I think Gammoth has some pretty decent aim, but against a moving target, and the fact that her snowballs don't do enough damage just to hit him on the body to make him fall down, she doesn't have a realistic way to get him down from the wall. But Gammoth is smart. She still has one trick up her sleeve, and that's to just simply get away from the wall. You think Gammoth is just going to stand there and get attacked while she can't do anything? Hell no. Gammoth is for real saying,
come to the street, bro. I will beat your motherfucking ass.
Now that Gammoth isn't actually near the wall, Jin Dahaad's breath attack can't reach her, so he has no choice but to get down and face her physically. But as Jin Dahaad is coming off the wall and going towards Gammoth, he decides to use a quick burst of speed and catch Gammoth off guard, making Jin Dahaad get one good clean hit on her, most likely on the head crest. And then after that, they go back to going band for band until the third and final phase of the fight. Now at the third phase, both monsters are pretty fucked up. Instead of just having some cuts on her body, Gammoth now has severe lacerations all over her body. You'd think she got into a fight with Sukuna, and her head crest is fucked up. But the worst of it all, I actually think at this point, she'd be missing a tusk, because I think that Jin Dahaad would be grabbing Gammoth's tusk a lot during the fight, either for leverage and trying to throw Gammoth off her balance, or just trying not to get hit by them. And with his claws being able to freeze the area of the surface he's touching, despite Gammoth being heavily resistant to the cold, if Jin Dahaad grabs Gammoth's tusk enough times, it'll make it weak to the point where something as big as Jin Dahaad would be able to break them. And I'm only saying one tusk because the moment that one tusk breaks, Gammoth is not going to allow Jin Dahaad to touch the other one. So Gammoth isn't looking good good, but she's not out of the fight yet. Okay, now what about Jin Dahaad? How is he looking? To no one's surprise, he's not looking too good. All of the ridges on Jin Dahaad's body are broken except for one, that being the largest one on his upper back. Yet despite not being broken, it has sustained damage. So another good clean hit, and that bitch is coming off. Other than his ridges being broken, he has sustained severe blunt force trauma all over his body. Despite both monsters being on their last legs, they refuse to die. Now Jin Dahaad only has one more move left to take down Gammoth. Jin Dahaad will again go towards the wall on the outskirts of the area they're fighting in, but not go up the wall. Instead, he will face towards Gammoth and wait for her to come near him. Now Gammoth, seeing that Jin Dahaad isn't going up the wall and having no other way to realistically hurt him without getting close, she decides to go towards Jin Dahaad to try and finish him off quickly. However, that's a trap because the moment that Gammoth gets near Jin Dahaad will start to charge up his ultimate attack. Now Gammoth could do either two things, and by the way, only one of them I think she would actually do. Either one, she'll try to run away before the blast happens, or two, she'll just straight up run right at Jin Dahaad while he's charging his attack. But since Jin Dahaad is pulling heat from the surrounding area and making everything else go even colder, Gammoth would probably stand still and assess the situation for a few seconds. By the time she decides to make any decision, Jin Dahaad would have already had about 5 to 6 seconds charged up on his attack. So even though I don't think Gammoth would do this, what would happen if she chose option 1 and decided to run away from Jin Dahaad? Would she be able to make it in time to be safe from Jin Dahaad's ultimate attack? I can't really say if she safely makes it out of the blast radius. If she had full health and was given the full 15 seconds to get out of there, then yeah, she'd be able to easily get out of the blast zone. But with how much damage Gammoth has taken, and the fact that Jin Dahaad even got some free charge up time, I don't actually think she'd be able to fully make it out of the blast zone. Now, I'm not saying that she just stands there and takes it, but I actually think by the time that Jin Dahaad pulls off his move, I think Gammoth would just barely be hit by it. Like her back legs and all of that would just barely get clipped by the explosion. I say that she barely gets hit because of this one clip of Gammoth limping away from the hunters. She's able to cross a decent amount of distance in 10 seconds. However, I can't look at this and reasonably say that yeah, because of this, she makes it out of the blast zone. I don't think this would have just killed her, but that damage on top of the damage she already has, she's pretty much out of the fight. However, that's if she runs away from Jin Dahaad. Now looking if she picked option 2, which I think she would, what would happen if Gammoth just said fuck it and ran towards Jin Dahaad to take him down? Well, before I actually say what would happen if she did that, let me explain why I think this is the most reasonable action for her to take right now. So you know how I said that Jin Dahaad was able to get 5 free seconds of charge time? Yeah, well, this is what Jin Dahaad looks like when he's 5 seconds into his ultimate attack. To someone like Gammoth, this dude is just standing still. Why would Gammoth not just attack Jin Dahaad when he's at his most vulnerable?
Good question.
Another reason why I think Gammoth would just attack Jin Dahaad is because I believe at this point, Gammoth is just seeing red and wants this fucking monster dead. She would probably sacrifice her other tusk if it meant this other monster is 6 feet underground. So what would happen if Gammoth decided to bum rush Jin Dahaad? Gammoth would get a clean hit off Jin Dahaad and knock him on his ass. And since Jin Dahaad's ultimate attack got interrupted, the little bit of cold that he was charging up before he got attacked would suddenly be released. But because of how damaged he is and the fact that almost all of his plates are broken, this small attack, if you can even call it that, would barely do anything to Gammoth. Even if she's injured, it would only be slightly stronger than his missed attack. Now that Jin Dahaad is slightly dazed and on the floor, Gammoth is going to put on her Tims and stomp this motherfucker out, breaking Jin Dahaad's last ridge and doing some serious damage to him, almost killing him. But before she can seal the deal, Jin Dahaad pushes her off him. Now that both monsters are on the brink of death, they go band for band one last time. And you can hear them continuing to fight until silence. Now all of a sudden, you start to hear footsteps, heavy footsteps, and with a thunderous roar, it announces its victory. Gammoth is the winner. And look at her, standing proudly as she... And she fainted. Yeah, that makes sense. Man, hunters, this was a close fight. Like, really, really close. And there's like two small reasons why I would give the edge to Gammoth and not Jin Dahaad. The first reason being that despite how strong Jin Dahaad is, he doesn't have a way to critically injure Gammoth. Gammoth has a layer of thick muscle that even a Tigrex can't chew through, meaning that Jin Dahaad can leave deep gashes in Gammoth all he wants. He will not be able to internally damage Gammoth. So as long as Gammoth can fight through the pain, she's kinda alright. The second reason being that if Gammoth lost both her tusks, she wouldn't get weaker. Does she lose out on some good weapons? Sure, yeah, but that doesn't make her physically weaker. Meanwhile, with Jin Dahaad, the more ridges you start to break off, the weaker his ice attacks are. And while yes, he doesn't get physically weaker if you break the ridges, you would be lying to yourself if you didn't admit that Jin Dahaad uses a lot of ice attacks. Probably just as much as his normal melee attacks. Speaking of that, that includes him adding ice attacks to his basic melee attacks. Those attacks would also get weaker because he would have a lot of broken ridges. So because of those two reasons, I gotta say that 55 out of 100 times, I think Gammoth would win. But again, this fight is so close that any detail could change the outcome of this fight. Like, what if Jin Dahaad clawed at Gammoth's eye and now she's half blind? Or what about if there was a baby Gammoth and now the mother Gammoth has to fight off Jin Dahaad while also protecting her young? Or even something like terrain. If there is uneven terrain, that makes it way more difficult for Gammoth. But then you can also say the opposite for Jin Dahaad. Like if Gammoth got 2 stomps off on Jin Dahaad's head, dude, he's freaking dead. But if I was fair for both monsters, I would just have to say slightly more times than not, Gammoth would win. Oh my goodness. I feel like I get exhausted when I make these long videos, but this is by far the longest video I've ever made. So please, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, for me, Jin Dahaad, and Gammoth, hit the subscribe and the like button. Normally, I don't do this, but for such a big video, if you hunters can share this video around with your friends, or if you just know someone that likes Monster Hunter, show them this video. Heck, maybe even show this on Reddit and see what those people think about the video. Anything would be greatly appreciated, hunters. You have no idea. And Gammoth, Jin Dahaad, you both did so great in this video. I'm so proud of you both. Hey, what are you guys looking at? What the fuck is that?